I want you to imagine, just for a second, that you are locked in a complex, high-stakes dispute.
Oh, the kind that just keeps you staring at the ceiling at 3 in the morning.
Exactly. Maybe it's a massive breach of contract with a key supplier. Something that's literally threatening to bankrupt your business.
Or maybe a bitter fight over intellectual property, like something you've spent your entire life developing.
Yeah, or perhaps it's a deep structural disagreement within a company you helped build from the ground up, and now your co-founders are trying to force you out.
That is a terrible feeling. Just a knot in your stomach that won't go away.
Right. So you're in this nightmare scenario, and you have a choice to make. Do you want to spend the next 3 to 5 years and a small fortune in legal fees battling it out in an adversarial court system?
A system where, let's be honest, a stranger in a robe who doesn't know you or your business ultimately hands down a binary winner-takes-all decision.
Exactly. Or do you want to sit down at a table, roll up your sleeves, and actually fix the problem with the person sitting across from you?
I mean, when you lay the reality of the situation out like that, the courtroom just sounds like a trap. You would choose the table every single time.
You really would.
You'd want to retain control over the outcome,
Yeah.
right? Preserve your resources, and maybe even save the working relationship if you can.
But the crazy thing is, historically, the global reflex for handling serious disputes has almost always been the courtroom.
Oh, absolutely. We are deeply conditioned, almost from birth, to think of justice as a battlefield.
Right. We think of it as a place where gladiators in suits just destroy the other side, not a collaborative workspace where two parties engineer a mutual solution.
And that deeply ingrained reflex is exactly what we're digging into today.
Yeah, we're going into a deep dive on a stack of really fascinating source materials. We've got research notes, policy memos, and some extensive on-the-ground commentary fresh from the Global Dispute Resolution Conference.
The GDRC.
Right, the GDRC, which was held in Paris on February 5, 2026.
And the materials from this conference are just incredibly revealing because we aren't just looking at theoretical legal frameworks or, academic wishful thinking here.
Right. This is actual real-world application.
Exactly. These sources analyze real data about how humans actually resolve their differences under immense pressure.
It seems like the legal world is finally waking up to the fact that their default product, which is endless litigation, is kind of failing modern society.
Failing it completely, yeah.
So the mission of our deep dive today isn't to get bogged down in dry legal jargon or read you a textbook. We're looking at a massive cultural shift in how the world handles conflict.
A shift that goes way beyond just changing the rules.
Right. We're going to explore why simply passing a law to force people to mediate doesn't magically solve the problem. And we'll look at how the global legal system is desperately trying to upgrade its human infrastructure to make collaborative problem-solving the new normal.
Which is a huge undertaking.
It is. Okay, let's unpack this. Because reading through these sources, it really strikes me that the legal world is dealing with, well, a classic gym membership problem.
The gym membership problem. I like where this is going.
So think about what happens every single January. Millions of people decide they need to change their lives, so they go buy a gym membership.
Right, the New Year's resolution crowd.
Exactly. They sign the contract, they get the little plastic tag for their keychain, and they walk out feeling incredibly accomplished.
Like you've already done the work.
Yeah. They think, I have done it, I am going to be fit. But buying the membership, which is the exact equivalent of a government passing a law that mandates mediation, doesn't actually make you fit.
No, it just gives you the legal right to walk into the building.
Precisely. Actually getting fit requires you to show up. It requires you to learn how to use the complex equipment, endure the physical discomfort of training, change your diet, fundamentally alter your daily lifestyle. In the legal world, passing a statute that says you must mediate is just buying the membership. The cultural buy-in, the shift in how lawyers advise their clients, the rigorous professional education required to actually mediate complex disputes, that is the heavy lifting.
And without the heavy lifting, the gym just sits empty.
Exactly.
That perfectly translates the core argument the experts at the GDRC were making. The consensus in Terrace was that statutory design, the actual laws written on the books, can create a behavioral push.
Sure, a nudge.
Right. But behavior only permanently changes when the practitioners, the lawyers, the judges, the corporate institutions, when they actually have a compelling reason and the sophisticated training to use that system effectively.
Because a law can force you into a room, but it can't force you to be collaborative. To
Exactly.
really understand how this friction plays out in the real world, the sources point us straight to Europe's prime proof of concept for this exact dynamic.
Oh, this is a great example.
Yeah, if we want to see what happens when a government forces millions of people to buy that gym membership, we have to look at Italy.
Italy is the perfect laboratory for studying the mechanics of shifting a deeply entrenched legal culture.
Right.
We have to look specifically at their 2010 legislative decree, which was just an absolutely monumental shock to their civil justice system.
Yeah, we need to paint a picture of the Italian legal landscape before 2010 for you, because the Italian court system was notoriously, overwhelmingly backlogged.
Oh, it's gridlock.
We are not talking about a few months of delay here. We are talking about routine civil cases taking years, sometimes over a decade, just to reach a preliminary conclusion.
Just massive systemic failure.
Right. Businesses were suffering because capital was tied up in endless disputes. So the government steps in with this 2010 legislative decree, and they introduce a mechanism called soft mandatory, or an opt-out style of mediation.
Yeah, for a wide variety of civil and commercial disputes.
Right. So what does that actually mean?
Well, soft mandatory is actually a brilliant piece of legislative psychology. It means that before you can officially file your lawsuit and drag someone in front of a judge for certain types of cases.
Like what kind of cases?
Think real estate disputes, defamation claims, medical malpractice, or really complex banking contracts. For those, you are legally required to attend a first mediation meeting.
So you have to go.
You have to go. The state isn't forcing you to reach an agreement, though. You just have to show up, sit down with a certified mediator, and listen to an explanation of the process.
Okay. And if you still hate the idea,
If you decide, after that initial exposure, that mediation is not for you, you can simply opt out. You get your paperwork stamped, and you proceed to court. But you are absolutely compelled to take that first step.
wow. And the sources note that initially this mandate was highly, highly controversial.
Explosive's probably a better word for it. The Italian legal community, particularly the trial lawyers, went to war against this decree.
Wait, really? Went to war how?
There were actual widespread lawyer strikes. The courts ground to a halt because the attorneys just refused to participate.
That is wild.
I mean, you have to put yourself in their shoes and understand the professional psychology at play here. For generations, a lawyer's entire identity, their prestige, and their economic model were built around litigation.
Right, fighting in court.
Mm.
Acting as the gladiator for their client. That was what they did.
Exactly. And suddenly, the government is forcing their clients to sit in a room and try to settle the case peacefully before the lawyer can even file the initial paperwork to start the real battle.
So the lawyers felt threatened.
Huge threat. The bar associations viewed this as a severe interference with a citizen's fundamental right to access the public courts. And frankly, they viewed it as a direct existential threat to their livelihood.
Right, I mean, if cases settle in a month, how do you bill for 3 years of trial preparation?
They don't.
But then the numbers start telling a very different story. The source material highlights that over time, despite all the strikes and the outrage, this soft mandatory system became deeply embedded in Italian civil and commercial justice.
The shift was undeniable.
Yeah, the legislative changes helped boost mediation from roughly 10,000 cases a year to a staggering 200,000 cases.
Which is a 1,900% increase.
That is just an astronomical jump.
What's fascinating here is that Italy proves statutory design isn't enough on its own, but it serves as a necessary, brutal catalyst. The system survived the initial backlash and only became durable because of eventual, hard-won lawyer and judicial support.
The judges got on board first, right?
Yeah, the judges were the first to come around. They started realizing that mediation was acting as a massive filter, clearing their suffocated dockets of cases that never should have required a judge's attention in the first place.
That makes sense. But what about the lawyers?
Well, this is the crucial pivot. The lawyers slowly began to realize that their clients were actually highly satisfied with faster, cheaper private resolutions.
Because a happy client pays their bill and comes back for future corporate work.
Exactly. The smart law firms started adapting their business models, marketing themselves not just as litigators, but as master negotiators. It shifted mediation from a weird alternative side option into a completely normal, highly integrated part of dispute handling.
It's amazing. It really leverages the sheer power of the default mechanism.
Oh, totally.
It reminds me of the behavioral economics behind organ donation rates or 401k retirement enrollment.
Right, the opt-out structure.
Yeah, when governments or companies switch from an opt-in system, where you have to proactively fill out a form to participate,
Yeah.
to an opt-out system, participation skyrockets almost overnight.
Because it uses human inertia.
Exactly. It uses human inertia to force a first step. You don't have to do the mental work to start the new behavior. You have to do the administrative work to quit.
Which people rarely do.
But wait, if I'm a business owner forced into a room by a government mandate, I'm going to walk in with my arms crossed, glaring at the mediator, just waiting for the clock to run out so I can get my form stamped and go sue the guy.
Which was a major concern.
I mean, the whole philosophical foundation of mediation is that it is a voluntary resolution. It relies on two parties willingly coming together to find common ground.
Right.
If people are forced to be there, doesn't that fundamentally kill the entire concept? That just sounds like a cynical box-ticking exercise.
That is the exact tension that dominated the debates in Italy and was debated heavily at the GDRC. Yes, it absolutely can become a box-ticking exercise if the system is poorly designed and the mediators are weak.
Okay.
But the data from the past 15 years shows something entirely counterintuitive. Even when parties are dragged to the table kicking and screaming, furious at the mandate,
Yeah.
the physical environment of the mediation room often changes the dynamic. Well, when a highly skilled mediator walks into that tense room, they don't focus on the legal arguments. They change the conversation from what are your strict legal rights to what do you actually need to move your business forward tomorrow.
Shifting the focus to the future.
Right. The hostility often de-escalates because it's the first time the parties are actually talking about their underlying interests rather than their legal posturing.
So the settlement itself must be strictly voluntary, but the exposure to the collaborative process doesn't have to be.
Exactly. Getting people into the room is the hardest part. Once they are there, the human desire to just solve the problem and go home often takes over.
Okay, so the Italian model gets people into the room locally. It clears the domestic backlog in Milan or Rome. But what happens when the room isn't local?
That changes everything.
Right. What happens when the dispute is between, say, a software architecture firm in London and a massive hardware manufacturer in Tokyo?
A classic cross-border mess.
Yeah. If you get those two international CEOs into a room and they actually agree to a complex settlement, how do you make sure that settlement actually means something when they fly back to their respective countries?
That question transitions us perfectly from the local mandate model of Italy to the global credibility model. And for that, the GDRC sources point us directly to Singapore.
And by extension, the ongoing, highly strategic policy debates happening right now in the United Kingdom.
Yes. Let's shift focus from the domestic courts of Europe to the international stage. The sources detail how Singapore has spent the last decade building a highly integrated, incredibly business-friendly dispute resolution ecosystem.
But the absolute crown jewel of this global discussion is the Singapore Convention on Mediation.
It really is.
The UK actually signed this convention in May of 2023, and they are currently working through the complex domestic implementation.
To fully grasp why the Singapore Convention is so revolutionary, you really have to understand the historical nightmare of cross-border dispute resolution.
Right.
Let's use your example, the London software firm and the Tokyo hardware manufacturer. Let's say they have a catastrophic supply chain dispute. The Tokyo firm delivers faulty chips, the London firm's product launch is ruined, and hundreds of millions of dollars are on the line.
A total disaster.
Exactly. Now, if they go to traditional court in London, and the London company spends 5 years and $10 million to win, they now have a piece of paper, a judgment from an English judge.
Okay.
But the Japanese company's assets, their factories, their bank accounts, they're all in Tokyo. Taking an English court judgment to Japan and asking the Japanese courts to seize a local company's assets is a famously complex, politically sensitive, wildly expensive, and highly uncertain process.
Because sovereign nations do not naturally like enforcing the orders of foreign judges.
Precisely.
Which is why, historically, international businesses have almost universally used arbitration. They write arbitration clauses into all their cross-border contracts because of the New York Convention.
Right. The 1958 New York Convention is arguably one of the most successful treaties in commercial history. It made international arbitration awards easily enforceable across borders in over 170 countries.
So if an arbitration tribunal in Geneva rules against the Tokyo company, the London company can take that award to Japan, and the Japanese courts are bound by treaty to enforce it almost without question.
Exactly. But arbitration is still fundamentally an adversarial process. It is essentially a private, incredibly expensive, slightly faster court.
You still have gladiators, you still have massive discovery, and you still have a binary winner and loser.
Right. Mediation, the collaborative alternative, completely lack that global enforcement mechanism. Until now.
Let's unpack exactly what the Singapore Convention does. According to the consultation materials in our sources, the convention allows direct enforcement applications for qualifying international settlement agreements across borders.
With extremely limited grounds for a court to refuse enforcement.
Right. So, under this new treaty, if our London and Tokyo companies sit down with a mediator in Singapore, talk through their issues, and sign a comprehensive settlement agreement, that document has global teeth.
Massive teeth.
If the Tokyo company flies home and decides to back out of the deal a month later, the London company doesn't have to start a new lawsuit.
No, they don't.
They can take that mediated settlement directly to a commercial court in Japan, point to the treaty, and say, enforce this contract. And the Japanese court essentially has to seize the assets or enforce the performance.
It elevates a mediated settlement from a mere private handshake contract to a globally recognized legal instrument with the backing of state power.
Which is huge.
And this is why the UK's policy debate surrounding their 2023 signing is so fascinating. The UK isn't just trying to sign a piece of paper to look cooperative at diplomatic summits in Geneva.
No, they have a bigger plan.
They are strategically attempting to adapt existing English enforcement tools to make mediated settlements highly visible and rigidly enforceable within their own borders.
Because the broader, aggressive strategic aim here is for the UK to solidify its position as the premier global dispute resolution hub.
Exactly. If London can offer top-tier commercial courts, world-class arbitration under the New York Convention, and now globally enforceable mediation under the Singapore Convention, they offer the complete, friction-free package to international commerce.
But wait, I have a question about this.
Sure.
If two parties go through a grueling mediation and they successfully talk it out, find common ground, and agree to a mutually beneficial solution, didn't they just shake hands on it?
Oh, yes.
By definition, the process requires both sides to voluntarily agree to the outcome. So why do we need a heavy-handed international enforcement treaty to enforce something that both parties already willingly agreed to do? It feels kind of redundant.
It seems redundant if you assume human beings always operate in perfect good faith.
Which they don't.
They certainly don't. It hits on a vital concept the legal economists at the GDRC refer to as paper value. In the real cutthroat world of high-stakes global commerce, trust is the rarest resource.
Okay, that makes sense.
Imagine you are the general counsel advising that London software company. The Tokyo company suggests, instead of suing us, let's just mediate.
Your immediate fear is going to be that it's a trap.
Exactly. Your fear is that if you go to mediation, you will be forced to reveal your underlying business interests, you will compromise your strong legal position to be reasonable, you will sign a deal.
And then the Tokyo company will just take that settlement back home, ignore it entirely, and use the 6 months of time they just bought to hide their assets.
Or spin off subsidiaries, or prepare for massive litigation.
It's the classic fear of defection. It's game theory.
Right.
You don't want to be the sucker who cooperates while the other side plans to betray you.
And that fear of defection prevents rational parties from even trying to mediate in the first place. Why sit down at the table if the other side can just walk away with no consequences?
Right. Cross-border parties simply won't use the process if they fear the other side will flout the result.
So the Singapore Convention acts as the ultimate backstop. It makes mediated settlements reliable. It replaces the interpersonal doubt and paranoia between the two warring companies with institutional trust in a global framework.
It essentially tells global businesses, you can safely put down your weapons and collaborate because international law has built a titanium safety net underneath the table.
Perfectly said.
So we have the laws and the domestic mandates, that is the Italy model forcing people to the table.
Right.
And we have the global enforcement and institutional trust, that is the Singapore Convention, and the UK implementation giving the settlements teeth.
Yeah.
You would think, looking at that architecture, that the problem is completely solved, the infrastructure is built.
You'd think so.
But the commentary from the GDRC in Paris points out something incredibly sobering. The real roadblocks to making this collaborative shift happen aren't legal anymore. The laws have actually caught up. The real roadblocks are deeply, stubbornly human.
This is where the source material gets intensely sociological and moves away from pure law. The experts at the conference identified 6 invisible barriers to sustainable mediation growth. These are structural, psychological, and professional obstacles that prevent the global legal culture from actually changing its daily behavior, despite the new laws.
The GDRC 2026 explicitly details these 6 barriers, and they paint a picture of an industry at war with its own habits.
They really do.
So let's go through them. The first barrier they identify is fragmentation.
Right. Unlike international arbitration, which has enjoyed a very consistent, predictable global framework for decades, the rules surrounding mediation are still a patchwork quilt.
Yeah, the mediation confidentiality rules in France might look very different from the evidentiary rules in Singapore, which look completely different from the statutes in California.
And when multinational corporations are looking for a reliable process to handle a $100 million dispute, fragmentation creates massive friction.
General counsels crave predictability.
They absolutely do. They want to know exactly how a process will unfold before they agree to it. Right now, navigating the global mediation landscape can still feel a bit like operating in the Wild West. You weren't always sure which rules apply until you were already in the room.
Which feeds directly into the second barrier, legitimacy and visibility. And this one is a fascinating paradox because it stems directly from one of mediation's greatest selling points, which is strict confidentiality.
It is arguably the biggest PR problem for the entire industry.
How so?
Well, when a massive corporate dispute goes to trial, say 2 tech giants fighting over a patent, it is a matter of public record. The financial media reports on every twist and turn, law students study the final verdict, and the public actually sees the justice system functioning.
Right. It creates a visible narrative of consequence.
Exactly. But when a brilliant mediator quietly resolves a multi-billion-dollar crisis behind closed doors in a neutral hotel conference room, and both companies walk away satisfied and profitable.
Nobody ever hears a single word about it.
Nothing. The public, the media, and even other government policymakers rarely see the success stories. Because the most spectacular outcomes are locked behind non-disclosure agreements, it deeply weakens systemic confidence in the process.
People assume mediation doesn't work for big cases because they never read about big cases being mediated.
Precisely.
It is exactly like having an invisible doctor who miraculously cures every single patient they touch, but no one ever sees the hospital, no one ever sees the patients leave, and the doctor isn't allowed to publish their results.
That's a great way to put it. It is impossible to build a global reputation on total secrecy.
That brings us to the third barrier, capacity and complexity. The sources note that modern disputes require deep, specialized technical fluency.
Yes, we aren't just talking about neighbors arguing over a property line or a simple fender bender.
No, we are talking about highly complex algorithmic finance, aerospace engineering, biotech patents, or international governance disputes.
And the structural problem here is that mediator accreditation is incredibly uneven globally. You might have a professional mediator who is absolutely fantastic at navigating the emotional dynamics and psychological trauma of a high-conflict family divorce.
Okay, but if you drop that same mediator into a room to resolve a conflict over a failed high-frequency algorithmic trading platform or a delayed nuclear power plant construction project,
They won't even understand the basic vocabulary of the dispute. The capacity to handle deep technical complexity is just not standardized. Parties won't trust a mediator who needs the underlying science explained to them like a child.
which leads right into the fourth barrier, measurement gaps.
Right, going back to the secrecy issue.
Yeah, because of that strict confidentiality we talked about, outcomes aren't tracked systematically. The GDRC notes this makes it incredibly hard to prove system-wide value.
Exactly. If you are a government justice minister trying to allocate a limited budget to dispute resolution infrastructure, you demand hard data. You want to see hours of court time saved and millions in legal fees reduced.
But how do you measure the value of a fire that was prevented from starting?
It's extremely difficult. Without consistent, measurable data, it is incredibly hard to justify the massive investment needed to scale the system.
And that lack of data allows the fifth barrier to remain deeply entrenched, which is cultural resistance.
We touched on this when we discussed the Italian lawyer strikes, but it goes much deeper than just protecting a paycheck.
Right. Legal education around the world is fundamentally deeply adversarial.
Or from day one of law school. Students are taught to read appellate court cases where there is a definitive winner and a definitive loser. They are rigorously trained to spot the logical weakness in their opponent's argument and ruthlessly exploit it.
They are taught to protect information, not share it.
Exactly. They are almost never trained to seek mutual gain or explore emotional underlying interests. So when these students graduate, pass the bar, and become practitioners, mediation feels entirely alien to their training.
It is often viewed dismissively, right? Like a soft skill or a sign of weakness that isn't quote-unquote real lawyering.
Yes, unfortunately.
And that cultural resistance is perfectly, securely locked into place by the sixth and final barrier: economic disincentives.
The elephant in the room?
The traditional legal billing structure, the almighty billable hour, actively rewards prolonged litigation, not early resolution. So what does this all mean for the listener? Let's ground this.
Okay.
Imagine your local car mechanic gets paid strictly by the hour. If you bring your car in with a strange engine noise and it takes him 5 full days of taking the engine apart and tinkering to fix it, he makes a massive amount of money.
Right.
But if that same mechanic invents a brilliant, innovative diagnostic tool that allows him to diagnose and fix your car in exactly 5 minutes, he loses an absolute fortune under the hourly model.
You go out of business.
That is the current reality of the legal billing system. If a brilliant lawyer prepares thoroughly and settles a massive corporate case in a 2-day mediation session, they have provided immense value to their client.
But the law firm just lost out on 3 to 5 years of guaranteed monthly billing for discovery, depositions, motion practice, and trial prep. The system financially punishes efficiency.
That mechanic analogy lays bare the devastating reality of the industry. You are asking an entire global profession to act directly against its own short-term economic survival.
You are. However, the GDRC framing is very careful to view these 6 issues: fragmentation, invisibility, capacity, measurement, culture, and economics, not as fatal flaws in the philosophical concept of mediation itself.
Right. They reframe these barriers as necessary growing pains.
Exactly.
Let's avoid the cliche of comparing it to a teenager hitting a growth spurt. How should we actually conceptualize these growing pains?
Think about the history of aviation. In the early days, you had barnstormers, brilliant, brave individuals flying by the seat of their pants, operating formally with very few rules and localized knowledge.
Just figuring it out as they go.
Right. That is where mediation has been for the last 40 years. Highly skilled individuals doing ad hoc work. But what the industry is trying to do now is transition into commercial air traffic control.
That is a massive leap.
It is. They are trying to build a rigorous, globally standardized, highly measurable infrastructure that can safely handle thousands of massive disputes simultaneously across international borders.
And building that infrastructure requires acknowledging that the old incentives and the old training methods are completely obsolete.
Entirely.
So to survive this transition from barnstorming to commercial infrastructure, the industry has to completely overhaul how it trains its people. Which brings us to the primary massive takeaway from the GDRC 2026.
Yes, education.
Education and training are not just optional networking events. They are the absolute main drivers of sustainable mediation growth.
The conversation in Paris relentlessly focused on this. The source material draws a very sharp, unforgiving contrast between the old model of one-time certification and the desperate, modern need for ongoing professional development.
Right, because in the past, a retired judge or lawyer could take a 40-hour weekend course in a hotel ballroom, get a piece of paper, and call themselves a mediator for the rest of their life, never updating their skills.
And the GDRC is emphatically saying that era is dead.
It has to be dead because of the complexity barrier we discussed. You can't mediate a 2026 dispute over AI copyright infringement using techniques you learned in a 1995 weekend seminar.
You really can't.
The commentary breaks down exactly what this new wave of rigorous, ongoing training is supposed to accomplish, highlighting 3 specific goals. The first is improving mediator competence in those highly complex disputes.
Right. You need ongoing development just to stay current with the rapidly evolving nature of global business, technology, and finance.
And the second goal?
The second goal of the new training paradigm is to actively reduce lawyer resistance. This is a critical pivot. The training isn't just for the mediators anymore. It is about educating the advocates, the corporate counsel, and the trial lawyers.
Bringing them into the fold.
Exactly. If lawyers understand the mechanics and strategy of the process better, they are less likely to view it as a mystical threat to their practice. They learn how to actually advocate within a mediation, rather than just treating it as a hurdle.
That makes total sense. And the third goal is to normalize mediation as a highly credible primary professional path. It shouldn't be something a judge does as a hobby in retirement. It should be a rigorous, standalone career from day one.
Absolutely.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. Reading between the lines of these GDRC memos, we aren't just teaching people to play nice or use basic active listening skills like nodding and saying, I hear you.
No, it's way beyond that now.
We are teaching professionals how to navigate highly technical finance or engineering disputes without resorting to courtroom warfare. That requires a completely different cognitive toolkit than just litigating or being empathetic.
It requires a concept that the experts call process architecture. A modern mediator handling a complex commercial dispute isn't just passively facilitating a conversation. They are actively designing a bespoke resolution process engineered for a highly specific problem.
So what does that actually look like in practice? How do you architect a process?
Well, it means making incredibly strategic decisions before the parties even meet. Do you require the technical engineers from both companies to meet first, without any lawyers present, just to agree on the raw data?
Oh, I see.
Right?
Right.
Do you separate the warring CEOs into different rooms immediately, or do you force them to give opening statements to each other? Do you sequence the negotiations so they have to agree on future licensing rights before they are allowed to discuss past monetary damages?
So the mediator is architecting the environment to manipulate the friction of the dispute.
Precisely. And the sources note a profound ongoing tension here between global standards and local realities.
Right, because if we want to fix the fragmentation barrier, we need a global standard. A general counsel wants a mediator in London to have the exact same baseline of rigorous process architecture training as a mediator in Singapore.
Yes, but human conflict is inherently, stubbornly cultural. A global standard must still be incredibly flexible to accommodate the cultural nuances of local jurisdictions.
Like what kind of nuances?
How parties save face in a negotiation, how they view corporate hierarchy, how they express disagreement or anger. These are all deeply local realities. A tactic that works brilliantly in New York might deeply offend a CEO in Tokyo.
So sustainable growth requires balancing that globally recognized architectural skill set with profound local cultural fluency.
Well, exactly.
The sources point out that ultimately, despite all the mandates and treaties, lawyer attitudes only permanently shift when they see actual, undeniable client satisfaction.
That's the bottom line.
A traditional litigator might absolutely hate the idea of mediation. But if they go through it and their corporate client is thrilled because a massive problem was solved quietly, efficiently, and the stock price didn't tank, that lawyer is going to want to repeat that success to keep the client happy.
But client satisfaction demands highly competent mediators. If the mediator is poorly trained, loses control of the room, or doesn't understand the business, the process fails.
The client is angry, and the lawyer gets to say, see, I told you this collaborative nonsense wouldn't work. We should have gone to court.
Exactly. The training is the bedrock of the entire global shift. Without it, the whole ecosystem collapses under the weight of bad experiences and confirmed biases.
But human competence in 2026 isn't just about reading body language, architecting a process, or understanding the intricacies of international finance.
No, it is increasingly about managing massive, overwhelming, terrifying amounts of data.
Which brings us to the digital elephant in the room. Enter the digital mediator. We cannot talk about a major global conference in 2026 without talking about the integration of AI and technology into human conflict.
The GDRC spent considerable time exploring how technology is fundamentally reshaping this landscape. And they weren't talking about science fiction. They were very specific about the current use cases.
Right.
We are looking at specialized digital platforms and AI tools being used for heavy document processing, early conflict diagnostics, rigorous case preparation, and managing highly complex, multi-party cross-border communications.
Let's paint a really clear picture of this. Think back to that delayed nuclear power plant construction dispute. You have tens of thousands of pages of architectural blueprints, millions of internal emails between contractors, supply chain manifests, safety logs.
Just a mountain of paperwork.
Right. In the past, teams of junior lawyers would spend years and millions of billable hours just reading through that in a process called discovery, looking for a smoking gun.
But now, highly secure AI tools are being deployed to ingest and process those millions of documents in hours.
That's incredible.
The AI identifies the core areas of factual disagreement, maps the communication timelines, and runs comprehensive conflict diagnostics before the human parties even step foot into the mediation room.
And the technology goes beyond just brute force document review, right?
Oh, absolutely. The AI is actively helping human mediators decide the best process architecture we just talked about. Based on the diagnostic data, the AI might suggest whether the case is suited for pure mediation, or if the data suggests the parties are too entrenched and it needs to pivot to a hybrid model.
You're talking about MedArb, right? Where the parties mediate first, but if they get hopelessly stuck, the mediator literally changes hats, becomes an arbitrator, and makes a legally binding decision on whatever issues are left.
Exactly.
But I have to imagine that introduces massive friction into the room. If I know the mediator trying to get me to compromise might suddenly become the judge who forces a decision on me, am I really going to be honest with them about my bottom line?
That is the exact friction that makes MedArb so controversial, and it's why process architecture is so difficult. You are absolutely right. Knowing the mediator might become the judge severely chills candor. Parties hold their cards close to their chest.
So how does AI help with that?
The AI tools are being used to analyze the historical success rates of these hybrid models in specific industries to advise the mediator on whether the risk of chilling candor is actually worth the benefit of a guaranteed resolution.
Fascinating.
The technology is also proving vital in supporting asynchronous online formats. Think about disputes where the relationship between the parties is so historically toxic, or the power dynamic is so abusive that putting them in the same physical room, even a virtual one, would be counterproductive or psychologically dangerous.
So they don't meet at all.
Right.
Yeah.
AI platforms allow for asynchronous text-based negotiations where the AI can instantly monitor for inflammatory aggressive language and filter it out, translating a furious email into a neutral statement of demands.
Wow. It's essentially an AI anger translator.
Pretty much.
But this raises the ultimate existential question. If AI can ingest all the documents, if it can diagnose the conflict, parse the entire history of the project, filter out the toxic language, and statistically calculate the most logical, fair financial compromise based on thousands of similar past cases.
Yes.
At what point does the machine just replace the human mediator entirely? Why do we need a human being in the room if the machine can do the perfect math of the settlement?
It is the defining question of the decade for the legal profession.
Okay.
But the experts at the GDRC firmly, almost unanimously, pushed back against the idea of replacement.
Really?
Yes, based on the sources, the conference stressed with absolute clarity that technology is strictly a support tool. It is an exoskeleton for the mediator, not a replacement for them.
Oh, why? If the AI is faster at finding the facts, smarter at calculating the math, and immune to fatigue, why not let the algorithm hand down the perfect compromise?
Because the algorithm misunderstands the fundamental nature of the problem. Mediation is about human beings, not just rules, data, or financial optimization. Human conflict is profoundly irrational.
That's very true.
It is driven by bruised egos, by fear of looking weak, by perceived slights from a decade ago, by the desperate need to save face in front of a board of directors. And AI can calculate the mathematically perfect financial compromise down to the penny. But it cannot sit across a table from a furious, exhausted CEO, look them in the eye, and build the genuine empathy and human trust required to make that CEO actually accept the compromise.
Right. AI cannot dynamically read the emotional temperature of a room.
Exactly. It doesn't know when the tension is so high that you need to call a break and talk about golf for 10 minutes, or when to lean in and push a stubborn party to confront their own unreasonableness.
It completely lacks the nuance of professional judgment. It can read the data, but it can't read the room.
Precisely. And perhaps most importantly, in highly emotional or deeply sensitive disputes, human beings have a fundamental psychological need to feel heard and validated by another human being.
A machine generating a perfectly logical settlement on a screen does not provide the psychological catharsis that is often entirely necessary for two warring parties to let go of their anger and truly move on.
Furthermore, preserving the absolute confidentiality of the process requires incredibly nuanced human judgment about what to say to whom during private one-on-one caucuses. AI cannot replicate that deeply human art of trust building and secret keeping. The tech processes the data. The human processes the emotion.
So we have all these disparate pieces. We have the sophisticated AI tech processing the documents. We have the rigorous new education protocols training the humans. We have international treaties like the Singapore Convention providing global teeth, and local laws like Italy's soft mandate forcing the initial exposure.
Right.
But these are all just individual puzzle pieces scattered on a table. To make this massive global cultural shift actually work, we have to look at the whole board. We have to assemble the pieces.
And that assembly is exactly what the source material does in its final synthesis. It provides a comprehensive challenge-to-solution matrix.
Okay, let's break that down.
The GDRC's core conclusion is that you cannot fix one piece of this in isolation. You cannot just pass a law or just buy software or just train people. You have to overcome the structural challenges through a completely holistic ecosystem approach.
Let's review these actionable solutions, putting it all together into an ecosystem reboot. First, to address the capacity and complexity barrier we talked about, the family mediator trying to solve the nuclear dispute, the ecosystem requires expanding accreditation specifically for complex disputes.
We need specialized, rigorous tracks for mediators, just like we have medical board specialties for surgeons.
Second, to address the training deficit and the fast-moving nature of modern business, jurisdictions must legally mandate continuing professional development. The skills must stay sharp and evolve constantly, not just rely on a certificate from 1995.
Exactly. Third, and this directly addresses the mechanic problem we talked about earlier, the perverse economic disincentives of the billable hour. The system must radically align financial incentives.
This means courts, governments, and especially major corporate clients need to structure their fee arrangements to actively, aggressively reward early resolution.
Which is a huge shift.
How does a corporation actually do that?
By changing the payout structure. Corporations need to tell their outside law firms, we are not paying you an hourly drip for the next 3 years to fight this in court. Instead, we will pay you a massive upfront success fee if you resolve this in a month through mediation.
Wow.
When the quickest path to resolution is also the most profitable path for the law firm, lawyer behavior changes overnight. You align their economic survival with the client's desire for peace.
That is brilliant. It turns the gladiator into an architect because it pays better.
Exactly.
Fourth, to fight the visibility and legitimacy barrier, the invisible doctor problem, the industry needs to start publishing aggregated, anonymized data.
We must fiercely, absolutely protect the specific confidentiality of who was fighting and what their secrets were, but we can aggregate the metadata to prove to the world that the system works.
So if a global hub can publish a report saying, last year, 5,000 massive commercial disputes were resolved via mediation in an average of 60 days, saving an estimated $2 billion in legal fees and preserving 4,000 business relationships.
That kind of data proves system-wide value to skeptical politicians and general counsels.
And finally, integrating technology carefully, using AI as an exoskeleton to process the data avalanche, improve access, and prepare the parties without ever sacrificing the human element that drives the actual settlement.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you might be listening to this deep dive while driving or cooking dinner and wondering, why should I care about international dispute resolution protocols or the intricacies of the Singapore Convention?
Right, why does this matter to the average person?
You should care, because the underlying mechanics of human conflict are entirely universal. Whether you are navigating a massive cross-border corporate contract failure, dealing with a bitter, toxic workplace dispute with a colleague, negotiating with a contractor, renovating your house, or just observing the intense polarization of global politics. Understanding this dynamic is a superpower.
What dynamic specifically is the superpower?
The profound realization that rules alone do not change human behavior. Incentives and culture do. You can mandate all the polite communication rules you want in your corporate workplace or in your marriage or in your national government. You can force people into a room.
Right.
But unless you actively align the economic and psychological incentives to reward collaboration, and unless you invest the massive amount of time required in training people how to navigate conflict without going to war, people will always inevitably revert to their adversarial gladiator reflexes.
That is an incredibly profound takeaway. You can build the gym, but you have to make people want to lift the weights.
Precisely.
To summarize the massive journey of this deep dive, legislation, like the brilliant soft mandate in Italy that drove cases from 10,000 to 200,000, or the UK's aggressive global ambitions with the Singapore Convention legislation, can open the door. It forces the issue and breaks the inertia.
But it's just the first step.
Right. It is the professional culture, the rigorous ongoing training and process architecture, the vital alignment of economic incentives away from the billable hour, and the careful supportive use of AI data that actually get people to walk through that door, sit down at the table, and solve the problem.
We are witnessing the slow, difficult, incredibly messy, but absolutely necessary evolution of human problem solving on a global scale. We are finally building the commercial air traffic control for human conflict.
And it is a fascinating high-stakes shift to watch unfold. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final, slightly provocative thought to mull over.
Okay, lay it on us.
We talked extensively about the barrier of visibility, how mediation's confidentiality is a PR problem, the invisible doctor. But let's follow that to its absolute logical conclusion.
Let's say this revolution completely succeeds. Let's say the GDRC's vision is realized, the ecosystem is perfected, the financial incentives align, and 10 or 20 years from now, almost all the biggest, most complex corporate, environmental, and international disputes are settled privately, collaboratively, behind closed doors.
A seemingly utopian vision for conflict resolution. The courts are cleared, businesses are thriving, relationships are saved.
Right. It sounds perfect. But here's the paradox. Our entire common law legal system, the way society knows what is right and wrong in business, is built entirely on public precedent.
It is?
Judges write lengthy public opinions on complex cases, and those public opinions tell society what the law means, how it adapts to new technology, and what the strict boundaries of fair play are.
So if everything is private,
If our public courts are empty because everyone is collaborating perfectly in private hotel rooms, what happens to the concept of legal precedent?
Yep.
How does public law ever evolve? How do we establish rules for new AI technologies or space commerce if the hardest, most complex questions are never answered in public? That is the unseen long-term cost of private peace. If the gladiators stop fighting in public, the public stops learning the rules of the arena. It is a brilliant, unsettling question.
something to think about the next time you find yourself in a dispute, whether it's over $1 billion patent or a property line. Do you want a private solution that saves your sanity, or do you want public justice that changes the rules for everyone else?
A tough choice.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the evolving architecture of global conflict. We will see you next time. Keep questioning the defaults.